What you're looking at here is the initial teaser trailer for the Ukrainian offensive that the mainstream media has flip-flopped on whether or not it's actually occurring. We're going to cover all the breaking current developments, so hit the like button, subscribe with the bell to stay in the loop, in the know, and up to date. Welcome everyone to The Real Report. Now, I'm going to show you a clip after this one's done because there's a little bit of an artistic style crisis from the Hollywood feat Ukraine. A day before dropping this teaser, which admittedly... let me know in the comments section down below if you think it's cringe or not. This is the clip they dropped prior.
Стійте! Зупиніться! Неможливо одночасно танцювати і керувати дроном.
Чому б ні? Можна робити що завгодно і як завгодно. Головне – виконати завдання. Вперед!
Using drone controllers to drop munitions into a trash can here. Now, albeit the Navy could probably learn a thing or two, this might be able to recruit someone who could actually pass the current fitness standards, which are already lower than an 8th grade summer fat camp. But moving on to the actual information for today, Russia claims it has repelled a large-scale offensive by Ukraine. You guys have probably seen some of the disputed pictures, whether or not it was an AMX or a Leopard tank that was destroyed. It was certainly not a Leopard tank. However, Russia's own account of the developments on the ground, we're going to talk about both sides, so hang in there. Both sides on the ground, one Ukrainian mechanized brigade lost over 300 troops, 16 tanks, 26 armored vehicles, and 14 other vehicles, 3 of which were supposedly Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, the IFV. Now, Ukrainians have gone public with their own account of the fighting in the Donetsk region over the past 48 hours, saying, quote, enemy forces carried out 7 missile and 25 airstrikes, 20 attacks involving multiple rocket launchers on positions of Ukraine's defense forces and populated areas. Now, out of The Guardian, Ukraine's own deputy defense minister says forces are moving to offensive actions in some areas as it happened this morning. So there's another article from the Ukrainian side confirming that it is ongoing. Hopping over here to Zero Hedge, did Ukraine forces just attempt to kick off their much-anticipated major counteroffensive, only to have it be put down immediately after it began? That's what we're trying to find out. Supposedly, the occupiers made 23 attacks, but all of them were repulsed. Of course, that's the Russians talking about the Ukrainian side. Kiev has admitted to some degree that the offensive actions have started Sunday into Monday morning Eastern Time. The commander of Ukraine's ground forces, Alexander Syrsky, said on Monday that Ukrainian forces continued moving forward near the long-contested city of Bakhmut in northern Donetsk. He made no comment on the counteroffensive, though, so they are making movements in some direction. Whether this is the much-anticipated counterattack is still up in the air. The daily report from Ukraine's general staff said only 29 combat clashes in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of eastern Ukraine occurred. Of course, we saw this teaser trailer already. Now, a counterpiece out of the Gateway Pundit, Ukraine is going kamikaze. Ukraine's vain attempts to launch an offensive ostensibly to oust Russia from conquered lands in the Donbass reminds me of the Japanese kamikaze bombers trying to impede the inevitable U.S. victory in the Pacific. It is needless death, sacrifice in the name of national honor, but when it's over, it's totally meaningless. Now, someone out of the UK, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, is a former, in quotations, UK Army officer. His opinion piece, titled, How Ukraine's Blitzkrieg Will Tear Putin's Forces to Ribbons, is a manifestation of insanity. Normally would require the person espousing such nonsense be wrapped up in a straitjacket and placed in a padded cell and fed jello, preferably lime green. Crawford wrote, long-range strikes into Russian forces, rear areas, some of which was from UK-supplied Storm Shadow air-launched cruise missiles, may indicate some shaping of the battlefield is underway. He wrote, also, these strikes are targeting Russian arms and fuel dumps, plus lines of communication, and are probably designed to both isolate enemy forces on the front line and prevent reinforcements and supplies being brought forward. Recent maritime drone attacks on Russian naval vessels in the Black Sea, we've seen those going on as well. And then talking about Ukraine trying to flank the enemy. The bottom line is the Russians, especially in the Zaporizhzhia Zaporizhia region have had over 5 months to dig trenches and zero everything in. So regardless of who comes out ahead in the fight, it's going to be a bloody one. Now, apart from losing 250 soldiers, here we're getting that number thrown around again. Ukraine is now short 16 tanks, 21 armored fighting vehicles, and Ukraine does not have an intact defense industry manufacturing new tanks or armored vehicles. So that is a concern, whether it was just a probing attack and nothing seriously committed, losing any amount of troops and vehicles that are irreplaceable is not good. Now here's a related tidbit that I think a lot of the world could learn something from. Ukraine says inspections found nearly a quarter of its air raid shelters locked or unusable. That's always something good to find out when you're running towards one, when your nearest raid alarm goes off. Concerns around civilian safety spiked in Ukraine on Saturday as officials announced inspection had found nearly a quarter of the country's air raid shelters were locked or unusable. A woman in Kiev allegedly died waiting outside the shuttered shelter during a Russian missile barrage. Over 4,800 shelters that were inspected, 252 were locked, and 893, we'll round that to 900 of them, were unfit for use. That is very concerning. I don't even want to think about the lack. I don't even know if there's any left open or even usable ones in the United States, to be frank. Top Ukraine aide says more arms needed for counter-offensive. Ukraine's spring offensive has been delayed because its military lacks sufficient arms to oust the Russian invaders. More weapons and ammunition are needed before the much-anticipated attack can begin. Now they're claiming, the defense minister in Zelensky, that it will involve 12 armored brigades and an estimated 60,000 troops, so that's obviously far off from the 250 casualties that were suffered today. Britain has agreed to supply long-range Storm Shadow cruise missiles and key support that nudged the U.S. to agree for Ukraine to be equipped with F-16 fighters. The real question is how long on the clock before those are actually delivered and in use on the field. Now, Kiev has been bombarded with 24 strikes in the last month, including 400 Iranian-supplied Shahed drones and 114 cruise missiles. Of course, we also have to throw politics into the fold here, as different Republican nominees have different perspectives on how they would go about solving the war in Ukraine. Zelensky admits fear of Trump in 2024, begs for more Patriot missile systems. Zelensky admitted that he was more comfortable with dealing with Biden. Of course, that's no surprise, considering Ice Cream Man doesn't even know what planet he's currently on, let alone that he's the leader of the free world. Of course, speaking of Republican presidential town halls with Nikki Haley, I just wanted to let you hear why it's a little disputed.
This is bigger than Ukraine. This is a war about freedom, and it's one we have to win. You look at those Ukrainians and what they do when Russia invaded their freedoms. They moved in there, went to the front lines, and fought for their country. The women said, we're not going to stay back. They made Molotov cocktails to defend their country. Everybody gave them 5 days to survive. But yet their passion and their will pushed them forward. What we have to understand is a win for Ukraine is a win for all of us, because tyrants tell us exactly what.
Oh, I don't think a win for Ukraine is a win for all of us, and the same could probably be said about Taiwan. And another article out of the Times of Israel, Ukraine moves to end battlefield stalemate in what may be the start of the counteroffensive. Again, this is after 15 months of the war. Russian officials seem to be trying to portray the Ukrainian attacks as the start of the counteroffensive, saying that Moscow's forces foiled at least one assault. Now, whether or not that was just a probing attack, of course, is what we're trying to find out. It's interesting to look at the bigger time frame. Going into the 2024 elections are, of course, over a year away, but Blinken says no Ukraine ceasefire without a peace deal that includes Russia's withdrawal. They're really trying to extend this into a decade-long war, because after we have fumbled the bag in the Middle East and left $80 billion in equipment over there, what could be more profitable and make the military-industrial complex boom bigger than ever before than if we can just continuously pour money and arms into a proxy war against the Russians backed by NATO. Unintended consequences people often overlook. Russia sees no prospects for the Ukraine grain deal renewal as deadline looms. Food, famine, and wars. The reason this one matters is it's more than 30 million tons of grain and agricultural products that have been exported under the initiative to date, and it should that end in the middle of this summer, July 17th, whether it gets extended or not, brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. Well, that remains to be seen. That could be big. Now, speaking of proxy wars, here's an interesting one for you. The use of NATO arms for attack in Russia raises doubts about Kiev's control of the situation. The Russian fighters aligned against Moscow, who launched a cross-border raid from Ukraine into the Belgorod region of Russia last week, used at least 4 tactical vehicles originally given to Ukraine by the United States and Poland. Now, of course, we're talking about who's launching the drones, who's controlling the drones, who are sending them deeper into Crimea, and whether or not the Ukrainian command has control of all of their battalions. And over the last 12 hours, the reason I bring that previous article up is U.S. officials have very blatantly confirmed dozens of gunmen who mounted a cross-border attack on Russia's Belgorod from Ukraine on May 22nd were using U.S. and other NATO equipment. The real question, the first tank that gets blown up with a depleted uranium round in the coming counteroffensive, is Russia going to blame the United States when they explicitly stated that would be a red line not to be crossed? And it's not just sending high-tech equipment like depleted uranium rounds, but Western long-range missiles to Ukraine will fuel spiraling tensions against the Russians. The Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, made the remarks on Sunday, following reports that Germany and France plan to provide Ukraine with long-range missiles. The first one of these that gets sent deep into Russia. Well, Putin might have to stop bluffing. Might be time to nut up or shut up about the use of nukes, which is not good for anybody. And the long disputed reports of neo-Nazis in Ukraine, well, it turns out it might be a problem after all, and that's out of the New York Times. Amazing article from the New York Times about the rather uncomfortable fact that photos of Ukrainian soldiers and leading battalions so often include Nazi symbols and flags. For a decade, the Western press warned Ukraine's fighters were dominated by Nazi units. In the US, anyone with a MAGA hat is deemed a Nazi and must be destroyed, but liberals see actual, real Nazis in Ukraine, which they're not all Nazis, of course, and want to fund and arm them. Interesting world we're living in. And in case you guys are fans of the Institute for the Study of War, which is of course a Ukrainian shill but is still useful for some of the day-to-day news, has not given us a report for today yet. The latest assessment was from June 4th, which was yesterday, which talked about prisoner exchanges. And Russian responses to and reporting about the limited raid in the Belgorod Oblast continue to suggest that Russian leadership has not yet decided how to react to these limited cross-border raids, or that raids and border bombing shelling are increasingly becoming the current focal point for criticism against the Russian military leadership, or Russian forces target Ukraine with Iranian-made drones. And Wagner Group claimed on June 4th, Ukrainian forces may have regained positions in southwestern Bakhmut, supporting repeated Ukrainian reports that the Ukraine forces maintain positions on the southwestern outskirts of the city. Keep an eye on Kharkov. That's going to be the next big place to watch. If you guys learn anything new, make sure to leave a like, comment down below, hit the subscribe button with the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.